sadık ziyaretçilerimiz demek lazım. Efendim de bugün çok önemli bir serginin de ilk günü ve ne kadar mutluyuz ki bu önemli sanatçının torunu da bizimle ve birazdan size bir konferans verecek. Büyükbabasını, onunla yaşamını, bir özel kişiyi, bu büyük sanatçının bir özel kişiliğini de tanıma fırsatımız olacak. Kendisine ben de burada bir kere daha teşekkür borçlu olduğumu söyleyeyim. Gerçekten az sonra göreceğiniz sergide de kendisinin bize vermeyi kabul ettiği ve evinden aldığımız pek çok eser var. Dedesine ait pek çok eser var. Ayrıca da pek çok eseri aydınlatıcı da ek malzeme verdi. Bir takım büyük heykellerin alçı kalıplarını ve ona giden, o heykelin oluşumuna giden kaldırım taşları diyeceğimiz noktaları tek tek sergileme şansını verdi. İlk baştaki programımız bu büyük sanatçının olgunluk dönemini kapsıyordu. Gene öyle kapsıyor. Fakat eminim ki onun verdiği bu eserlerle sergimiz daha da bir çerçeve kazandı. Pek çok şeyi aydınlatma fırsatı oldu. Size hoş geldiniz diyorum ve Joan Punyet Mirô'yu davet ediyorum sahneye.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great honor to be in Istanbul. Thank you so much for your lovely words. I'm going to speak about my grandfather's spirit into matter. There you have a young artist called Joan Miró in Barcelona. And at that time, he was already learning to paint, getting himself away from the academic teaching of the vanishing point and perspective, and trying to be able to read poetry and to listen to music, to let his spirit go free. But at the same time, he had a fight with his father. His father said, "You gotta be working as an accountant." And he had a terrible nervous breakdown, and he wrote him a letter saying, "Father, dear Mr. Father, I am not an accountant, I am a painter. And I will pursue my career forever." And then the First World War arrived to Europe, and my grandfather was able to be influenced by Van Gogh, Matisse, Cézanne, all the Fauvists, but especially by the great influence of Dadaism, because Picabia arrived to Barcelona, and that was a tabula rasa that really shook the ground. And all the teachings were really removed and put a huge question mark on them. But then in 1920, he went to Paris for the very first time. He was 27 years old, and then he discovered a radically, totally new world of creation. And he came back to Spain, he went back to Paris later on, and in 1924, he began to read poetry next to the studio of André Masson and Dostoevsky, Baudelaire, Rimbaud, Lautréamont, Michel Léris, all the great Spanish mystic, San Juan de la Cruz, Teresa de Ávila, and the chemistry of the spirit, plus the world of dreams and imagination, were making of him a ground-breaking pioneer that began a huge revolution with these paintings. But it was not a piece of cake, because he was starving. Miró was with no money in the pockets. And one day, Sunday morning, he went to his little chambre de bonne in the floor number 6, going up the stairs, all the way up, so tired. But there was a huge beef being cooked by the concierge with artichokes, carrots, onions, tomatoes, and tout petit peu de Bordeaux. And all the stairways smelled so good. So my grandfather went down, knocked at the door. Excuse me, I'm so hungry. Could you please change a plate of beef for a drawing of mine? And the concierge said, yeah, why not? So he gave him the drawing and he ate the dish. But the day after, the lady broke the drawing. So it's good to know that when you risk all your life to create a new language that is already being defined as surrealism, coming from the world of dreams, fantasy, emotions and sensations, with this amazing painting that now is at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. You have The Birth of the World. It's a painting that was influencing Jackson Pollock and the drippings. If you pay attention, all these are very gestual, very free movements everywhere. And here you have the sexual intercourse of one icon impregnating the female sex and the sperm going up the sky with a plane flying and the clouds in the sky. That was 1925. And 3 years later, he was able to do the Spanish dancer. This is the skirt of the dancer when she was performing flamenco. Then the female sexual attribute, the neck, and this very aggressive piece of paper cut out with another collage on the left and one stain. That was the most radical perception of iconoclastic and anti-academic rendering of a woman. And he was already being considered as the most surrealist of all of them. Then photography came into the picture. Why are you going to paint if with a photo you can just render all the landscape without any problem? And he said, I'm going to put you in trouble. I'm going to risk you and I'm going to dare you to see if you can photo my mind, if you can photo my dreams, if you can photo my nightmares, if you can photo my fantasies. So he was like a Tibetan ascet, being able to find the beauty of the emptiness. And this painting that is now at the Metropolitan Museum Modern Art is called Photo, This is the Color of My Dreams. Please, go back to 1925. I beg you to understand that we are in 1925. And do this and see what happens to you. And one of the most economic, minimalistic portrait of a dancer is this huge work that is the needle of a hat, a feather, and a cork that belonged to André Breton. The stylistic rendering of a very minimalist woman, just being able to evocate the movement and the jump and the performance of the dancer without even thinking about making a figurative definition of the human being, but just portraying the image that came from his subconsciousness. That was Miró's great threat. In Spain, we have had horrible times in the past. There were brothers killing brothers, there were sisters killing sisters, families being ripped off by the Spanish Civil War, that was from 1936 to 1939. And Picasso painted the amazing Guernica that now is at the Sofia in Madrid. Picasso said, it will be in New York, but when democracy comes back to my country, I want Guernica back. And now it's back home. But my grandfather made this amazing, huge painting with 6 panels of wood. And you can see my grandfather over here on the ladder. And that will give you one scale of the proportion of the huge painting. But Picasso was very clever with Malagueño, that he rolled up the Guernica like this, and he was sent to London, to America, to get money for the Spanish refugee children. And my grandfather was not clever enough, and he was sent to Spain, that was in the middle of the battlefield, and the painting was lost. That's a tragedy for me, because I love so much my grandfather. I love so much his art. And I would love to have this painting next to Picasso's Guernica. But this, unfortunately, will never happen because it was totally destroyed in the Spanish Civil War. That was a big loss for us. And here you have my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, and the American sculptor Sandy Calder in 1938 in the north of France. We, the Miró family, are very small. When my grandfather used to go to see Picasso in France with my grandmother, Picasso said, "But Joan, you are always coming with the same wife." And my grandfather only had one daughter. That was my mother. She married twice, and we were 4 brothers. But my older brothers passed away. So now we are only 2 left, me and my younger brother. That's a big tragedy as well for us, because I miss my family a lot anyway. In 1941, just when the Second World War began and the Nazis invaded Poland, my grandfather was in France making these amazing, beautiful constellations in 1941, when he was really having a lot of trouble to go back to Spain, running away from the Nazis. But he wrote a letter to his dealer in New York saying, "Pierre, I have just achieved the most beautiful things you could ever imagine. I believe this is the most important thing I have ever done in my life. And this is called the beautiful bird revealing the unknown." So you will say, what is the bird? The bird is here. You have the head, the back, the eye, the body, the tail, and the wings. He's flying away up to the sky. And here you have one woman, the body, one eye, 2 eyes, the nose, vagina, here another woman with a head, with the eye, and the 2 arms being raised up as in a sign of tragedy, of assassination, of fear. Because at that time, my grandfather, my grandmother were taking the train down to Spain, and my grandfather was wearing here a little folder with 20 constellations, while my mother was only 10 years old, and they were going to the border. So they didn't know what was expecting in the country when they got back. And then in 1942, he made the maturity of the constellations, also with a great rendering of a lady and figures, birds, and stars. Many people know that when these constellations were exhibited in the Pierre Matisse Gallery in 1945 in New York City, you know who saw them? Give me a guess. One of the most important abstract expressionist American artists. Mark Rothko. So if you are able to detach the foreground from the background, you take out the lines, you have a color field by Rothko. So you see how strong was Miró's influence in America. And in 1947, welcome to USA, there we go. Finally, he made it to America. When he arrived, he was greeted by color, and this is Miró, Pilar, my mother when she was 17, and the great French artist called Louise Bourgeois welcomed all my family in her house in America. And that was a tragically very strong rendering of a cloth that was going to exhibit it in the MAC Foundation, in the MAC Gallery in Paris, that was going to be the Exhibition International of Surrealism. But you have hands here. He was putting his hands like this. And here he was making very gestual drippings with all his figures and signs and letters that belong to his very personal vocabulary. After a while, he decided to leave Barcelona, where he settled down, and in 1956, he went to Mallorca. His mother was from Mallorca, his wife was from Mallorca, and he built a house where he lived and he died. And one amazing master chief of modern architecture is the CERT studio that was built in 1956. This is quite good because that's the interior of Miró's studio in Mallorca. And over here, this is the painting that we have today in Istanbul. It's unbelievable because it's underneath the other one. So you will see here in the Sabanci Museum, but as I said before, how was my grandfather looking the spirit into matter? By stepping on matter, by killing beauty and trying to create from distraction, by killing poetry and making anti-poetry, by trying to do not go all the time with the beautiful canvases stretched in a stretcher, but just letting the canvases go on the floor and paint with a brush and with a broom on them in a very gestual and violent matter. That was 1973. He was preparing a major retrospective in Paris. His art was extremely expensive in Sotheby's and in Christie's in America, in auction. And he said, they are doing this, so I will do a much radical and much more aggressive technique, which is using a broom to paint on the canvases, using a broom with black paint over here, and that's a very similar work that one we have here in Istanbul. I also want to have this photo because I love the Turkish flag. The Turkish flag, that beautiful moon with a star, is so poetical that looks like a mirror. But here you have a moon by Miró, which is blue, and is about to run and become a monster that can bite and devour one splash of paint. So it's not the same poetical vision that we have in the Turkish flag, but it's much more a biomorphical, anthropomorphical rendering of the moon. Later on, this is the work that was before on top of the other one, and that's a work made with sandpaper. Sandpaper is used to paint. For example, you gotta paint a wall, you scratch the wall with sandpaper. It's an industrial material. It's not a fine art, polished and beautifully crafted material. No way. So he went to buy all these materials to just rip them off in different parts, turn the page upside down, and nail a piece of wood on top over here and over here. This is what I was going to tell you, because in 1929 my grandfather said, I want to assassinate painting. Painting has been in decadence since the time of caveman, and I want to break Picasso's guitar. That commitment had to do with trying to go beyond what we have already seen as the beautiful poetical mirrors with suns and moons and stars that were combining at the same time the two creativity. But in Miró, what it really matters is not the money, is creation. And when you create, you take yourself under risk. One thing is creation, and one thing is decoration, my dears. Will you water your plants in a rainy day? I don't think so. Why am I going to do more moons and more stars? There was a big mirror that had a very anger and frustrating inside that was boiling, because at that time in Spain we had already a difficult moment, because it was 1973, and in 1976 there was a very tragical happening, because Franco was about to die and he did the garrote vil to Salvador Puig Antich. Franco passed away in 1975 and the future was uncertain, so Miró felt uncertain. Miró felt fear, and that was already rendered in his paintings.